Hello, this is Janae from the Conscious Community Podcast and Conscious Community Magazine. We wanted to let you know that we have sponsorship packages available. If you are interested in sponsoring this podcast, please email Spencer at spencer@consciouscommunitymagazine.com or call or text 630-492-0831. 630-492-0831. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate all of you. Welcome to the Conscious Community Podcast. This episode, we're speaking with Gary Gach, like Bach, correct?
Right.
About his book, Pause, Breathe, Smile, and his life experience, and what exactly Pause, Breathe, Smile means, and what does conscious community mean, and more.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we were just talking before we got recording. We wanted to make sure we talked about this, and I think we've talked to a lot of different guests about the meaning of consciousness from their individual perspectives and from the traditions they practice. But as I've understood from some of your work, we've listened to some other interviews with you, the issue of community and what community means and what conscious community means is something that we haven't spent as much time talking about on our podcast. So we wanted to talk with you about what community means in general and what conscious community means, and get a little bit of it about that from your perspective.
Gosh, thank you. What a great way to begin. Right now, you and I, the three of us, are an energy field that represents the whole universe. And we have listeners who themselves are being drawn in to this community of this moment. I'd start there. And to recognize that we're always in relation to ourselves and other people and the universe in a way that, if it is conscious, is larger than ourselves in a way so that we can commune, if you will, with all of life within us and all around us. And speaking from my personal experience, because that's really all I know, for a long, long time, I was yearning for and resistant to community.
I think that that's something that you find a lot, actually, in people who engage in contemplative lifestyles, contemplative practices.
Yeah, I don't
Is there
particularly like being around other people.
Is there kind of resistance to community? So.
Yeah, like I was offering practice at lunchtime for people who work in a Catholic charity group, and they have lunchtime speakers. And I was like trying to bring them. I'd done this a couple of times, and I'd noticed that everybody comes in, gets their meditation, and goes out without any sense of like what you might call in leadership terms team building, because they're offering mindfulness now in sports, because it's not only being able to focus and be in the present moment, but if you ever seen some of these basketball players, they don't even look at who they're throwing the ball to because they're so connected, that they're working as a group. They're like going as a river. Even though they're tremendous superstar egos, when they're on the court and they're in the zone, they're part of this organism. And that's a tough one for most of us, I think. It has been for me for various reasons. And when you find a community, it's the greatest thing. I think. My teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, says that, there's this idea of the Buddha coming again, right? That if the Buddha were to come again, he would take the form of a community. And there's also a sense that as we're talking together in these times, from our own experience, I think we don't have any disagreement that these are kind of precarious times. These are challenging times. And that in order to meet the challenge, we need community. Otherwise, we can get isolated like some tiger on a hillside that's all alone, or some bird that's left the flock. But if we can come together as a community, the magnification of consciousness in a community is something in and of itself that has a presence. And I'm speaking now to two people and aware we may have, I don't know how many listeners, but I don't see them. But I've been on stage as an actor and also as a presenter. And when a human being is up in front of more than 100 people, there's something that goes, ooh, a lot of consciousness there. You can feel it. All you have to do is say something, everybody laughs, and you're playing consciousness in a way. And it sort of looks like this. See, he's playing with the force field. You kind of, and once when I was in front of 1,000 people, whoa! And I was the focus. I was the lens. Man, that was like another order of magnitude of that feeling. Also, I have been with 1,000 people on a retreat, and we just spent all day walking up a mountain, looking out from the top of the mountain and coming down, and being part of 1,000 people on a narrow trail that's kind of windy requires this sense of conscious community. It's not just, here I am with 999 other people on this retreat, and I want to get mine. So I've got to make sure that I don't step on other people's toes and get over. No, it's something else happens where you kind of go, as I say, as a river.
I feel that applies to musicians, particularly when you're in front of an audience, even a small audience. You have this connection with people in the room that, even if you're shy and standoffish and terrified of being on stage, but you feel it when you're on the stage. Quite a magical thing. That way, like you're relating to like the universe and the consciousness, and you're all connected in that way.
Well, I kind of had that feeling at one point. I don't know if I ever really articulated it very well to myself, where everybody's individual universe, when they're off doing their own thing, is kind of rendering for them. But then there's certain times when you're in some kind of collective experience. I was thinking of it in terms of the internet and dialogues that happen on the internet, that where you get a group of people, in a specific forum or on a specific, on Facebook or on Twitter, and they have a directed consciousness that it kind of can manifest itself,
There's a phrase now, hive mind.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it can kind of manifest realities, it may not necessarily be able to make a dragon appear.
Well, it depends on your definition of a dragon. Okay.
But it can kind of manifest itself in reality when you have that many people focusing on, what truth is, or, what the truth of a certain situation is. If you have enough minds all moving together, that becomes reality.
Right. I also have been practiced, I always go back to when I started on this path, which is when I was very young. And I came to Buddhism and meditation and consciousness the same time as I came to writing. And the early form of writing that really struck me was haiku. And everybody knows haiku, the shortest form of literature. But what we're learning now is that haiku originally wasn't conceived as individual units, that they were links in a group poem that people would get together in a great celebratory manner and practice observing this evolutionary group mind composing this group haiku called renga. And it was only later that they said, oh, you can take the individual links and frame them unto themselves. And I say this because I've practiced renga with people online, and they're just as good as renga that I've practiced with people face to face. That you're aware that this is taking shape this way as I call it group mind. I don't know what else to call it.
Kind of like that party game where you each write a sentence, and then the person who writes the next sentence has to start with the word you ended with, or whatever.
Yeah.
Story.
The surrealists called it exquisite corpse, but when the surrealists were doing that's that word surreal, higher level of reality. And in the 20s in France, that was very popular to do. So one more thing I just wanted to say, as we're cogitating our initial the first go round, and that's that the world is largely a product of community. Everything I see right now is a product of so many communities of people and living beings and whatnot. And to form conscious community in these times is an opportunity to address imbalanced situations that have come about through collective community effort that might have been unconscious.
Yeah, that's...
But that is there. And to give you the example that I don't think you would disagree with, but some people do, is our climate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just one person has done this. It's not just one individual at the head of a company that's responsible. It's everybody. And I have never owned a car because from an early age, I got the message that oil is the drum that everything's going to be dancing to. And I just said, okay, I'll let other people do it. I don't want to be part, that's not part of my karma. Well, I haven't stopped global warming, by one hair's breadth. I'm just conscious of all that consciousness of which I am not a part unless I use somebody else's oil and I get a ride from a bus driver or somebody else. In order to make any change in our climate, it will take community and community of communities, because we said the word internet, which is the word meaning the network of networks, internetworked. You could have a coaxial cable and fiber optics and copper wire, and they're all internetworked in a way so that they all communicate. So that's, to me, I'm a community of cells 20 billion cells that are all managing to cooperate and, orchestrate my life. And so from the microcosmic to the macrocosmic and all the levels of scaling that we can conceive, seeing things in terms of communities is very positive and powerful, and in our Western way of seeing, unique, and I think necessary, because the Western way of seeing is about the isolated self from the time of the Renaissance.
Yeah, everything is discretely divided and labeled and categorized and broken apart. And I think in one of the other interviews I heard with you, you were talking about everything being broken up with a hammer and categorized. And the thing is that from a non-Western perspective is that it's a continuum. There is no real distinction between my smallest cell and me and the outside environment and the planet and the universe. Like, it's all, you can describe things discreetly, but there is no actual distinction.
It's also, they're now observing things in terms of the relationships between things, which is to say that they're communities, so that it's not the individual items, it's the way that they interact and interreact that creates what's called emergent properties.
You have when you have some one of my favorite things to study is semantic networks as kind of the underpinning for artificial intelligence and neural networks.
Yeah.
What you have is like a web, and you have, say, a node in that web might be car, and then another node on that's connected to that might be Volvo, and another might be van, and another might be transportation, and another might be sports car. And not only are those all connected, but they all influence the meaning of one thing. So
of any other.
A new node to car that's related to car, you're affecting what car means.
Well, regarding what you're saying and taking it back no less, I think that's kind of, we're missing that in the definition of mindfulness, that they're pushing that idea into a certain way. This is what it means, as opposed to seeing it as being more holistic and relating to your whole life.
With a lot of these holistic non-Western practices, as they come into Western practice, we're still kind of trying to jam things into our Western way of categorizing. And to tie back into what you said about at the end of the meditation, spending time as a community. I mean, I don't know how many yoga classes I've seen break up and people go cars.
Yeah,
you've managed to you've recognized that yoga has some value, and you brought it into your life, taken time for it, and at the end of the class, you're out of it, and you're out of the community. There's no staying afterwards and talking or
And do you feel that we've trivialized the very notion of these practices, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, etc., when we brought them to the West? They're missing like the key component.
Well, they've had great, benefits and nourishing outcomes for people. What I've done with the current, my last two books, I guess, are trying to consolidate and then have a more stable base to go deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not necessarily a negative thing. There's a very Western, I describe it as like people take yoga classes because they want to have a cute butt, kind of perspective. It's a new kind of exercise that makes you look hot. Yeah. But that's not necessarily entirely a bad thing. Like, it's still plum. It's still bringing people into a practice. I mean, I got a lot of stuff from my family at a very young age as far as Buddhism and some of the other contemplative practices. But for me, what really made it click was martial arts. And I didn't start martial arts because I wanted to examine my, inner being. I started martial arts because I liked Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, when I was a little kid, like, I thought it was cool. Like, I discovered from going to martial arts class, I discovered that being in that community and doing those exercises, it's almost like kind of a brute force meditation. Like some people can sit quietly and meditate until they start having a sense of awakening, and some people you really have to beat it out of them. And for me, like the physically grueling experience of a martial arts class, I found more personal just self-discovery than sitting quietly. Like it just, for the way I was built, that just worked for me. And I think that's another thing that comes up a lot, is that we've interviewed people from a lot of different practices and traditions, and the one thing that always irritates me is when part of their message is that my way is the only way. I think there's a lot of different paths that are equally valid, and as soon as you start saying like my path's the only path, you're off the path.
Yeah, you said a lot. I'm hearing is that there's various things that bring us to an initial coming to consciousness, if you will, rather than being, part of the vast conspiracy of sleepwalking.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That we come to consciousness. That's what awakening in a very simple sense is. I got woke this morning. Hallelujah. And it's getting brighter. Amen. It's very real and it's happening. But we need some kind of prompt or carrot or something to leave our burning house, to use a popular metaphor in Buddhism. And then when we're out of we're out of the burning house, we say, where's the toy you promised me? And you say, oh, that, let me give you something else. You don't really want to attach to what the sense of this, to my, to follow it as conscious community. My sense of this is that when we come to this kind of sense of consciousness, it's very much internal. That we don't want to have to say, oh, now I've got to tell me what to do. We do want somebody, like if you're a martial artist, who's going to tell you, hey, dude, you're going to get a sciatica if you don't hold your shoulders this way, or something like that. But you have to find your own way with the form. And then the form is doing you, and you're doing the form, right? And then you're part of a community of a tradition. You're part of a lineage. It's like you're plugged into this electric source. And I think that what's been missing in terms of what we were just saying in the adaptation of Eastern things in the West is we pick on the meditative practices, even the martial art meditative energy practices, at the expense of what they're also integrally a part of in the East, which include a sense of, like in yoga, they have niyamas and yamas, the ethical tradition in yoga. And in yoga, there's also Advaita, the consciousness that informs yoga as being a non-dualist way of union with the divine. And if I'm just doing my Lululemon exercise for the day to beat stress, that's fine. But there can be instances in which people's kundalini is rising and they're not grounded. And I've heard stories where people get into trouble with yoga because they looked at it as this kind of easy shake and bake kind of fix without being grounded in it as an integral system. As is true also, I feel, with mindfulness, which, it's like when Freud was creating psychology, he was told, look, we're making you a doctor. You're a Jew in Vienna. Watch out. don't get cute. And it was true. There were some days his patients we were told, Freud can't come today. There's too much anti-Semitism in the street. If he were to show his face, he'd be stoned. And yet he managed to impart what was, as we're finding out, in large part a Hebrew, Eastern, mystical tradition through Western science.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, mindfulness has been the secularization of Eastern modalities, largely Buddhism, because you hear the word mindfulness as part of the Eightfold Path, by people who scientists have said, it comes from Buddhism, but and then they're quick to say, well, but it's not.
Thing that
we talk about that a lot.
To the Sam Harris.
Yeah, I listen to Sam Harris's podcast
about that. Like he says he's considered part of this atheist group, but he talks all about mindfulness and
he's kind
meditation. Like
dithered on that in a recent episode.
It's interesting.
And I
missed those episodes. You'll have to tell me where they are.
I've referenced Sam Harris before, and then I'll listen to the next week's episode, and there's this weird synchronicity where he's like refuting what I was talking about, and I'm like, okay, maybe I got him wrong. I never read any. I read one of his books, and I discovered him well into his podcasting career. A coworker was like, "Hey, you should listen to this if you listen to podcasts." But he's one of the four horsemen of new atheism. Is the kind of So atheism had this huge explosion of interest, and I attribute that primarily to the website Reddit. When Reddit got going and got really popular a number of years ago, the atheism subreddit was one of the default subreddits.
Whoa.
So you would, when you started your account, you'd be subscribed to a dozen or so topics, and atheism was one of them. And I think it turned a lot of people on to new atheist thought, which would include Dawkins and Hitchens and Chris, and who's the other guy I always forget? I can't remember the fourth. Anyway, so, but these were the four main thinkers, and Harris came from a neuroscience background, and then Richard Dawkins and
Hitchens,
Christopher Hitchens, and they were kind of like the champions of this new, secular humanist, atheist, all religion, all mysticism, anything supernatural is just false.
Right.
The only thing that's real is science. And you had this kind of movement spring out of this. And I think a lot of it is fed by people who grew up in highly religious households and had just a very negative anti-religious sentiment to begin with. And then they discover atheism, and they just kind of go fundamentalist with it whole hog in the other direction and throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think when you're looking at something like mindfulness coming from a Buddhist tradition, like all this terminology that comes from these Eastern traditions, like it might sound weird and esoteric, but it's really just the language of those cultures describing phenomena. You could use Western secular terminology, but the terminology in yoga already exists, so just use that terminology.
It relates sort of to his book where he uses different words for these ideas.
Yeah.
Which I liked.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Janae, give me an example that you liked.
Well, when you're saying...
I mean, you got to realize, guys, this is the first week of the book.
Okay.
And so I'm so excited to kind of pop out of it after 5 years and 12 drafts. And
5 years, wow.
12 drafts.
Wow.
That's actually something Harris has talked about, is that he wrote books before and he got into podcasting, and he can do a podcast and reach more people in a week than if he spent a year writing a book. And people keep asking when he's going to write another book. And he's like, I don't know when I could take the time away from the podcast to be able to do that. Yeah, and I'm not sure I'd be able to be as timely. There's a value in crafting.
My question to that is, how transformative of the podcaster is it compared to processing in solitude, quote unquote, with language on a page?
Yeah.
And I don't deny that you, having done so many interviews, exist in a realm that I admire because you are part of a conversation of an evolving of the species. You know, that's an amazing transformation. But it's not the same as, well, what are you going to do? Collect all your interviews and publish them as a book?
Yeah.
People do that. You know, people do that. And I love reading them. But what I want to know is, what is it like to be Spencer and Janae being healed and transformed by all of these people in your lives? You know, but I don't want to interview you. You know, that's kind of like, it's an
interesting point.
It's a protocol thing that we could get into another time. So I'm just saying, thank you for giving me this opportunity as somebody who's been in solitude and this X coordinate of going straight down to now, you know, there's people out there on the horizontal community, and I want to hear what you were going to say about how I'm translating this, because translation is a big part of it for me too.
When you're talking about in the book, I like the word flow and being used. People say that all the time now, but I don't feel that they understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, I picked up in one of the other interviews you were doing, where you're talking about, there's this idea of like kind of attaining some kind of stasis of perfection that I think a lot of people have. Like once you get everything set in your life, then it's just right. And I think that causes a lot of pain and suffering, because that is never the case. That's impossible. Everything's always in flux. And you were talking about the flow state, and I don't know if you want to explain that a little bit.
Yeah, no, you think you have it, and you finally have it, but it is not a fixed thing. It is this, it's like you can't step into the same river twice. You can't step into the same river once. So I'm using the word flow rather than the typical word impermanence,
which does seem almost to have a negative.
Yeah, all of the Sanskrit words were, not self and not permanent and not as positives. It's similarly in the beginning of the book where there's the ethical guidelines for everyday life. I didn't do this. Thich Nhat Hanh and our community did this. Rather than say no violence, no intoxication, no stealing, no lying and using false speech, no screwing around with, your sexual energy, framing them as positives. So that it's, instead of nonviolence, it's reverence for life. Instead of not stealing, it's generosity. To frame them in those ways. The other one that I think is kind of, I hope it works. It's certainly different, is everybody always comes up against emptiness when they hear of, is it nothing? No, it's the opposite of nothing. It's really full. It's the nature of reality that if it's impermanent and always flowing, if everything is never staying the same, then one thing is always becoming another in metamorphosis, like the water cycle of rain and snow and then oceans and rain again. Then you can't really say that anything has a separate lasting self. So if it's empty of lasting, permanent, fixed identity, this lack of ownership or identity or self really means openness. I could say blank or possibility, but I'm just saying openness, because it's a simple enough something I can tell an illiterate person on the street, and they'll get, oh, openness. I get it, that you're just open to things and getting out of your own way. Finding how to translate these terms which have their context in another culture. It's, I'm a translator of literature, poetry too. So for me, it's engaging. How do I find in our contemporary life, every day, situations that would be applicable to what they say, and the anicca, which is impermanence? Well, flow, And I think we have a great opportunity because the American language is this great resource of so many different cultures and has a lot of ways of saying things that's very directly, like, get out, get out, or just do it. Those kinds of sayings can be just as effective as, the ones that our grandparents learned when they first heard of these teachings. And Janae, you thought Spencer was long-winded. Ha!
It's all like college professors.
Well, I think that one thing that I've run into a lot is that Western thought has been underpinned by the kind of idea of the individual, discreteness of concepts, and even if you look at church dogma or doctrine going back to the Middle Ages and stuff like that, it's very it's from the Roman tradition. It's very legalistic, and it's very this is what this is, and you say your prayer this many times, and this is how much gold it's going to cost you to get into heaven after what you did. And I think it almost creates a sense of despair in someone who's so heavily entrenched in that type of thought.
Sure.
To hear something like emptiness or impermanence, that they've invested so much in the idea that they're going to build this empire and they're going to buy this mansion, they're going to have these cars, and they have this legacy, and they're going to build their pyramid and put their tomb in it. And I think the idea that very factually, in a million years, it's all going to be dust. Like, nobody's going to remember your name. Like, it's all very impermanent. Like, that creates a sense of despair in people. Well,
that's when you have to realize the interconnectedness.
Yeah, I don't find it despairing. I don't think there's anything sad about it. It's really that just
well, it's identification with the ego versus identification with a larger consciousness than yourself.
I don't know. I think it really is that the Buddhists talk about attachment being the source of all suffering, and that doesn't mean you can't have a house and a family and kids and love your kids and everything else. It just means don't try and create some kind of static existence.
Exactly, another translation term that I cringe, and I get the hives when I read, from 1890 or even 1920 or even up to 1950, Buddha said, "Don't have desire." Right? He did. Buddha said, "Don't have an ego." He did. No, all of these sayings are just vast misinterpretations of someone trying to explain to another person, don't hold on. Don't just let go. Don't cling to things that aren't real and aren't in front of your nose.
And it's really that's yet another example of that Western, Roman, legalistic, rule-based.
Yeah, do this.
Even when they're talking about Buddha, the only way they can conceptualize Buddha is that he's the king and he's on top of the pyramid. He's dictating rules down to the people under him. The idea that they could eat anything but that they can't process that idea. Somebody's got to be the emperor. Well, somebody has to be in charge around here.
That's wrong in their own religion too. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's
Christianity is the main religion in the West. It's the same idea. Like they made up this system.
Yeah.
Well, Christianity borrows, the Buddhist monastic system. I'd like to circle back just to kind of see if we can go one more round.
Okay.
That the Buddha said, when there are two or more people gathered together in my name, I will be there. Mm-hmm. And as we were saying in the beginning, since we are forming a collection of energy that's a community, let's call it Buddhist community right now for sake of continuing the conversation. We don't have a leader. There's no Vatican to this impromptu group. Mm-hmm. We're following our heart, and that's the way it is. So that's very challenging. The Buddha said in the beginning and in the end of his teachings, he said, don't, follow what I do because I said it, or because you heard it, or because a flashy person on TV did it. But if there's anything that you've heard from me that you've tried in your own life, and you've tested in the laboratory of everyday experience, and you like it, by all means, keep it and use it and marinate in it and see how it will nourish you. Right? The end of his life, he said, don't follow me. Be your own light. And I think the important thing here is that when he said this, he was vertical, he was horizontal, he was in his parinirvana pose, meaning he was going over into the light. And that's where people get really stuck too, is they want to have the sense of their immortal soul reuniting with the Creator in the realm of the Creator, which is called heaven, which may be possible. I'm not denying it. I'm not saying it is. I wouldn't know. But what I'm saying is that that's possible right now. Mm-hmm. That maybe we haven't left the Garden of Eden, that maybe our individuality is part of this divine experience of life, of which we're not only a part, but which we are.
One metaphor I found in my life, we just moved in this house, and we could have, for the same amount of money, we could have bought a more modern house where everything was new and the appliances were new and the floors were new and the walls were new.
This house is old.
And this house is, at our best guess, 1840s. We're not sure because the documentation doesn't.
We don't have records before then, right?
The earliest records are 1898, but it is a constant. It is, there's no done. Like, we could strip this house to the studs and remodel it, and it would not be ever done. It would be constant.
In the same vein, yeah, a person who buys a new house is going to have the same experience.
Well, yeah, because there is no working on it. There is no stasis. Done. Yeah. There's no done. So
that's such a great analogy.
For me, like, I grew up in houses like this, and it was always like, I mean, it was miserable when I was a kid, but now it's just part of my personality that, like, there's nothing that sounds more enjoyable to me than puttering around my house. It's like, I hung some drapes today, I filled in some nail holes, I'll go pull some weeds in the garden, like, it's never done. It will never be done. If I stop doing it and someone else doesn't do it, the whole thing is just going to cave in. Like, it has to be constantly, it's a flow.
Well, it's not a
to
our own
project that you can check off. It's just a constant
flow.
Our
own personal evolution is never done. Like he's saying, it's flow. It's impermanent. You can't going to get to the spot where you're perfect and nothing's going to ever change.
I've been trying to translate this concept to business people in my professional life, and everybody looks at me like I'm an alien. Like, it's.
Would you have
I think there's a growing acceptance, because I think a lot of executives who are in these very high pressure jobs kind of stumble backwards into yoga and stuff like that, and then start their own path of spiritual growth. But, like, I'm trying to conceptualize the idea of work and business as a flow state that is not like, it's not a linear process. It's not ever done. it's just always an ongoing.
There's no five-year plan. What I would do, I mean, I'm just starting to try to bring this to business situations. There's been so much popularity of it in medicine and education and now business. Is just be very immediate. And in the back of the book, I think I said this, after talking about impermanence and interconnection and openness, let's see for ourselves. Breathing in, I'm aware that the breath in my lungs, I can't hold on to it or I'll, I've just got to let go. And then it leaves again, just like it did. It's like the wind. And then I notice that this breath, the next breath is somebody else's breath. It might be a tree's breath. And breathing out, I'm giving it to the edge of the horizon where other people will. So it's interconnected. And then I notice that this is not my breath. It doesn't have, my barcode on it. It doesn't have, any logo that says this is Gary's breath. He's just breathed it on this date. And so you can see in immediate situations these things, and people can have, this is what Zen is. It's not conceptual. It's, finding where somebody lives, where that is in that moment, that they can connect with it, and that they themselves are a collective. They themselves are an organization of cells and so forth. I'm not sure that the brain is actually running it. I think the heart sends 7 times more messages to the brain than the heart gets from the brain. That's what they say. The force field is larger. The gut is like a second brain, as Candace Pert pointed out. So that we're this incredible organism that's like, the places you go to, like on a business retreat, the company that we ourselves are companies, these vast incorporations of, an organism of different parts. So if you can and I think it's very easy for you as a martial artist to bring it back to the body. Because that's usually the first responder for feelings and emotions and things maybe that are hard to deal with, and as well as thoughts. And so if you ground everything in the breath and you're aware of the arising and falling of breath, without trying to hold on or conceptualize it, you maybe notice that when I'm talking, you can say this, maybe you'll notice when I'm talking if you're breathing and aware and conscious of your breathing while I'm here with you, that you're able to absorb more rather than trying to judge and criticize and mentally evaluate what you're hearing. Then you have conscious community of your physiological body in a way so that when things arise, like difficulty at work with the manager or with the leaders or with the staff, you can notice it the same way and respond just as resiliently as you have practiced by being aware mindfully of your breath, sitting, walking, washing a dish, going from the door to the car, and every opportunity in everyday life. For me, I mean, this is not my forte, but it's what I'm getting into more. This is where mindful leadership can begin. Because when you have that presence, everybody wants to pay attention to your paying attention because you have something that people are getting. Oh, she is not really phased out like everybody else. She's not getting stressed out like everybody else. Why is that? And then you start getting resonance.
Well, the circular logic that I have run into that's been frustrating to me, frankly, is that when I attack a project at work or I get myself into something, it's getting myself into a flow state to be able to knock it out and get it done fast and well is not difficult to me. It doesn't matter to me how physically intensive it is. No day of work at any day job has ever been as difficult as a single kung fu class was. It's I don't care how many boxes I have to lift, or how many pounds of whatever I have to move, or how far I have to walk. Like, it's all just like, it's all mental. Like, so, and the issue that I have is that I come in to do something, and I've talked about like, look, I'm applying principles that I learned in martial arts and in spirituality to what I do at work. It's not magic. It works. Yeah. And then I do what I do, and I have very linear, analytical Western minds looking at what I'm doing and trying to dissect it and create some kind of formula from it that works in their Western, discrete, broken apart with a hammer way. And
how can we use it? Yeah.
That is the point, is you can't do that and do that. Like,
right.
if you break it apart, you kill the golden goose and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, you like, and I can't force someone who doesn't practice mindfulness to be mindful. They have to want to learn it and learn how to do it themselves. There's no shortcut, and it's not easy. It's hard work. And that's, what my Kung Fu instructor always said is, and I'm not sure, he's not a fluent Chinese speaker, so I'm not sure, somebody might correct me on the translation, but he always said that Kung Fu means hard work. It doesn't mean martial arts. It's not about kicking somebody's butt or, being a badass. It just means it's teaching you how to work hard.
Shinku. Yeah.
So, anyway, I digress.
I was going to ask you one last thing before we run out of time. Is one thing that's interesting about the title of your book is Pause, Breathe, Smile. And smile, I have found much in my life, especially as a female, is it's like a negative thing. Is they're telling you to smile even when you're not feeling it, when you're not connected to it, and it doesn't mean anything. It's like that. It's like the Walmart logos.
You'd be so much prettier if you smiled.
Yeah, and not really being authentic with it, which of course that wouldn't be mindful to smile inauthentically. But would you like to define what you mean by smiling and how you feel that affects our overall emotional state and our state of consciousness?
It's our what?
And how that affects how our state of consciousness, our emotional state, what smile. What's the significance of it, I suppose?
I'm glad you asked me that, Janae. I was asked that as in my first interview, and I think I flunked it because I didn't get the way you're saying it, and also seeing it, that there is this kind of a issue for people who have both X chromosomes about how you look.
An art installation that this woman did posters, stop telling women to smile. And it's because it's a problem for women. Yeah.
As I understand it, and I'm mansplaining here, but as I understand it,
right.
It's very offensive to a woman who may be going through her own thing that day. Maybe her dog just died. Maybe her boyfriend just broke up with her. Maybe she just had a flat tire, and she's on her way and she's walking to work, and she gets in the elevator, and some guy she doesn't know looks at her and goes, "Oh, you should really smile. You'd be pretty if you smile." And like, he's basically from the feminist dialectic that I've understood, as I've understood it, he's basically saying, you're an aesthetic object in my world, and I would enjoy looking at you better if you were smiling. And you're really bringing me down by not smiling. So hey, give us a smile. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the 50s office place and hey, could you wear a little bit of a shorter skirt, and why don't you wear a little bit more makeup kind of attitude. So
in this context,
I'll just, and to do it right, since we've got enough listeners, I'll be really quick about it. Pause, breathe, smile is an exercise or practice anyone can always do. You just pause, enjoy some conscious breaths, and then give yourself a gift of a smile, because you can accomplish stopping, letting go, and connecting. But it's also, the smile is a couple of things. In terms of the book, pausing is ethics, breathing is meditation, Smiling I use as the image for wisdom. It's like Mona Lisa. Why is she smiling? What does she know? Or Buddha. Why is the Buddha smiling? And sometimes it's just the faintest smile. So let's try this. Wipe our face of any emotion and relax the 48 muscle groups of our face. Come on, just relax them completely. Neutral face. Neutral face. Let go of all the muscles. It's hard to do. Exhale completely, and then just not so I can see it, just within your own mouth and lips. Give yourself just that little slight upturn, and notice with your next breath, not whether it makes you feel happier, which it probably does, but also that you're in charge now.
Mm-hmm.
That it gives and they find this scientifically, that there's a certain amount of autonomy that we can give to our consciousness with a smile. So it's a kind of a mouth yoga. If we do this, that will happen. Then, for the rest of the book, it goes on to say, yeah, but it's not a dualistic thing. It's not about, if I do this, will I get that? Will I be happy? Will I be conscious? Or any of that stuff. It's sort of the beginning entryway to invite people in to consider these kind of thorny things for people who are rugged individualists, about non-self and impermanence and interconnectedness. And so, sometimes the best way you can sum it all up, is like a smile. Not like a flirty smile, not like a ha-ha happy day emoticon smile, of which we've got 40 to choose from. Just this, at the elemental level, like when you smile at your dog will look at you like, oh, what's up? And then if your dog and you are communicating, you can think something to your dog will think to you. And the smile becomes sort of this gateway. It's an amazing thing. I'll say one last thing, that a smile is both our response and our, we react to it, and we also enact it. It's just an amazing, it has a very non-dual, I'm sorry I maybe talked out, but it has this very non-dual aspect to it. That it's both the stimulus of happiness, it's also the response to happiness. And since there is no dualism between the two, sometimes, and I think this is really the takeaway for the smile, is we can jumpstart. We can do a kung fu and not wait for joy, not wait for happiness, not wait for something we're looking for in a silver platter, but give ourselves the gift of a smile right here and now because, we're above ground. It's a beautiful day. We're alive. We're with loved people we know and love and care for. And then we allow ourselves for our heart to open. It's a mouth yoga. Sometimes the smile precedes the joy, rather than the joy preceding the smile.
And I like that intentional. Yeah. I really feel like that's what's missing when you're telling other people to smile. You're taking their intention.
I think that's the other half of it, is that for every person who takes offense at someone telling them to smile, like I've told people to smile, male and female, where I genuinely, or maybe not told them to smile, but tried to get them to smile, where I genuinely was feeling empathy because I could tell that they weren't happy and was trying to, make them feel better, and it wasn't because I thought they would be prettier if they smiled, and so there's kind of another side to it. And also another theme I keep coming back to is if the universe has any meaning whatsoever, it seems to be kind of a joke. So we might as well laugh about it, because
in Hindu it's called Leela.
It's patently absurd.
It's all play. It's all what?
It's patently absurd.
It's patently absurd.
Especially the last couple of years. They're clearly the simulations off the rails and stealing ideas from The Simpsons or something, because it's just gotten really weird lately.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To sum up our conversation, His book is Pause, Breathe, Smile. And
Yeah.
do you have any other books or any other
I imagine
things you'd like to share with
your book right now is probably the thing you want to bring our listeners' attention to.
you have a website, correct?
GaryGach.com is spelled GaryGach.com. Gary Gach, like Bach with a G.com. And it has the better of my 9 other books, some of which I wrote, some of which I translated, some of which I edited from other people. The subtitle of the book is Awakening Mindfulness When Meditation is Not Enough. And awakening is consciousness. And mindfulness, I'm grateful to say, after this conversation here on out, is beloved community. I'll tell you a quick story. My teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, used to talk with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who nominated him for a Nobel Prize. And whenever they met, they always would talk about building community. And when Thich Nhat Hanh told that story, the most recent time was on a Christmas. He said Dr. King did not have a chance to see the building of beloved community that he was so aspiring to do. When Thich Nhat Hanh said this, he had a community of thousands of people around the world. And he said it as someone who was so proud, divinely and humbly, to be a part of a community, to make refuge for other people. Like what you were saying, Spencer, I think, in this impulse of you see someone else and you want them to smile, or you just want them to be part of something bigger, a community. You want to, your wisdom wants to just take them in an embrace, and they need to embrace their own whatever it is before they can do this. This happens in community. The most important thing that I've learned in my practice is how important it is to have a community and to consciously create an opportunity to build it. When my group, which has been meeting weekly for 10 years now, what we do, people say, what do you do? Is we sit, we walk, and we talk. And people say, well, I sit, I walk. Yeah, when we sit, we know we're sitting. When we walk, we know we're walking. And talking is communication to build community. It is deeply listening to what other people are saying and not saying. Listening from the heart and speaking from the heart.
One thing that's occurred to me, because I really do feel like I kind of very deliberately went out, and I don't know where this started, or I know about when I became aware that I was doing it, but I didn't trust my own rational faculties, and I started going out and looking for people who were kind of experts at certain things, so that when I was thinking about a specific subject, I could say, my Facebook friend Bill is my favorite example. He's a physicist and a fighter pilot. So anytime anything about science comes up, I'm like, Bill, what do you have to say about this? And I'll tag him, I'll be having a Facebook argument, and I'll tag him and be like, well, what do you have to say, physicist? And he comes in and just destroys whoever amateur science fan was arguing with me about. But I at a certain point realized that I was kind of building this community. And then at a certain point, I realized that no matter how good your intentions and no matter how much you're trying to help other people by building the community, there are those who don't want people to build communities to make the world a better place or make people be happier or whatever. They're heavily invested in the opposite. And I haven't quite figured out how to handle that. Like the positive manifestation people will say, oh, just don't give it energy, but like some people are fairly malicious and fairly heavily motivated to be malicious. And I just don't know quite how to deal with that at this point, like other than just laughing it off, and doing my best to deal with it. But there is, there's a reason why somebody shot Martin Luther King. Like they didn't like the idea of what he was trying to say. There's a reason somebody shot Gandhi. I was pretty far along the path of like, hey, I'm going to help the world, before I was like, oh crap, somebody might kill me for this. Like it didn't even dawn on me. And I'm like, why would that? I don't understand. Like I don't understand how somebody would not want the world to be a better place. So like I was pretty far down that path before I ever even encountered or before it ever even occurred to me that somebody wouldn't want that.
Yeah. I owe you more than a short, response.
I meant to bring it up earlier, but that's been something that when I keep hearing about community and like it's this effortless thing to just go join the conscious community, everything's gonna be hunky dory. It's like I don't know about that. Like it's gotten a lot of bad things have happened to people for trying to do just that. So
I think the simplest answer without the specific situation, because it's the specifics of each situation where it counts, that there isn't a one size fits all kind of, wouldn't it be nice if we could just, what do I say when kind of thing?
Can we all just get along?
Huh?
Can't we all just get along?
Can't we just all get along while we're all in this together? It takes a certain amount of work in myself to understand the person who is manifesting difficult energy and to address that after I recognize that this person is suffering and really wants to, come at me with a knife. I don't blame the knife. The knife is this unconscious object. It's being held by someone who is the victim of fear, greed, and ignorance because of their isolation, from the way things are. And how do I compassionately come to know them better so that I'm not running away, I'm not coming at them, And there's a practice that you might try, and that is to write a letter to them. I'm not saying that if you do this, they're automatically going to hear you in some kind of mystical woo-woo way. But when you do this, you'll find a transformation within yourself so that you'll be able to be more present with the dark energy that they are kind of being pulled along by their nose, because you're aware of it and you've done your own kung fu with it. And then they're kind of like startled that you're not, whoa, hey man, I just threatened you with death. What's your problem? Why aren't you? And you're just looking at them like, well, you haven't killed me yet. But you're not saying anything really. You're just, it is a kind of a martial arts response. And I think writing a letter to them, and a love letter, dear, I've read your letter in which you want to kill me. How wonderful that you feel these values so strongly. You just try, and the fifth time you write it, you'll start, I think, getting involved in a process of transformation where you recognize if we have to live with these people within ourselves and in the world. It's not like, well, they're going to go away or we're going to go away. And it's not like they're going to about to do the work, so we have to do the work first.
Well, I'm sorry to get you off on that extra little tangent on the at the end.
I think it's the real work.
Yeah,
this is what's important.
Dealing with the darkness. I actually just read an article about the difference between people who face the darkness and the people who only
Yeah, and that was,
light.
and that was,
there's
I
a
think,
balance between the two.
that was, I think, this gentleman I spoke to the other day who said there's really this kind of divide in the conscious community between the kind of positive manifestation, the secret and visualizing positive things happening and not wanting to think about anything negative, and the people who want to address kind of the injustices in the world. And
you need to have both.
Yeah, I mean, that's
yourself,
something, I've
lead to real transformation.
I've gone horrible places and seen horrible things, and I always felt like I was there for a reason to try and, it's, I don't know, like somebody who goes to volunteer to go to Africa and work in an area struck with famine. Like, you're not manifesting that famine by going there and feeding children.
Sorry, we took much of your time for the conversation.
Yeah, I talk too much. It's a disability. You have to accommodate it.
Not at all, Spencer. You have a way of expressing yourself where the period at the end of the sentence doesn't come boom like that, and it's more than one sentence.
Yeah.
That's all.
It's very, very great. Good to talk to you. And
a great conversation. I thank you so much.
Yes, and we'll let you know when this comes out, and we'll email all the links and whatnot.
Thanks so much.
Again.
Have a good
I
day.
look forward to our next encounter. Take great care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Conscious Community Podcast. If you'd like more information about sponsoring this podcast or advertising with Conscious Community Magazine, in print or online, please email me at spencer@consciouscommunitymagazine.com. That's SPENCER, or call 630-492-0831.